I wouldn't have cursed out that one executive at the record label that put me on the blacklist.
Damn. Okay.
He was on top of the world with platinum hits, flashy style, and unforgettable energy. Sisqó became a global sensation almost overnight. But just as fast as he rose, he disappeared. No more chart toppers, no more spotlight. What really happened? Behind the scenes? Was it fame, pressure, or something the public never saw coming? This is the untold truth behind the rise and tragic downfall of Sisqó and why his silence still echoes today. In the early 2000s, if you turned on the radio, went to a party, or watched MTV, you heard one name everywhere: Sisqó. With bleached, silver hair, energetic dance moves, and a voice that cut through every beat. He didn't just perform, he exploded. He was wild. He was fearless. And when Thong Song dropped, it changed everything. It wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural moment. Sisqó wasn't trying to blend in. He was out to dominate. And for a brief moment, he did. But behind the flashy videos, leather outfits, and explosive performances, something more fragile was quietly unraveling. Fame hit fast, faster than anyone could prepare for. And with fame came pressure. People didn't want Dru Hill anymore, they wanted Sisqó solo. The industry started shaping him into something bigger, louder, more marketable. He wasn't just a singer anymore, he was a brand. But with every interview, every photo shoot, and every label meeting, the real man behind the image was slowly fading. Sisqó was still performing, still delivering, still climbing. But the pressure to keep topping himself to make another hit as massive as Thong Song was building fast. And when his second solo album dropped, expectations were sky high. But it didn't explode like the first. It did well, but not well enough for an industry that only rewards the spectacular. The whispers started. Is he done? Was it just a phase? Behind the scenes, relationships were straining. Label support started to thin. And the public? They were already chasing the next big trend. It didn't matter how talented he was. If he wasn't new, if he wasn't hot, he was forgotten. Slowly, the stages got smaller. The cameras backed away. And Sisqó, once a global icon, was left watching it all slip through his fingers. But the truth is, this wasn't just about one song, one album, or one bad deal. Sisqó's downfall was deeper, more painful, and filled with moments the world never saw. As the spotlight dimmed, so did the noise around him. The same media that once couldn't get enough of Sisqó had now moved on. The hype was gone. The interviews stopped coming, and the radio stations stopped playing his music. But what people didn't realize was that behind closed doors, Sisqó was still fighting. He didn't disappear because he quit. He disappeared because the machine that built him suddenly stopped pushing. He tried to adapt, he tried to evolve, but the industry had already boxed him in. They wanted Thong Song again and again. And when he didn't give them another global anthem, they labeled him as a one-hit wonder. That label stuck unfairly, because Sisqó was never just one song. He had been carrying Dru Hill, writing music, producing, performing, but none of that mattered anymore. The industry doesn't care about effort. It only rewards results. And in the eyes of the system, he had already peaked. Money became tight. Trust became rarer. People who once promised loyalty disappeared. Managers changed. Deals fell through. There were comeback attempts, but each time, something felt off. The momentum wasn't there. The support wasn't there. And maybe worst of all, the confidence wasn't there. When you've been at the top and watched it all vanish, it messes with your soul. Every room you walk into feels colder. Every handshake feels rehearsed. Sisqó kept touring, doing throwback shows, holding on to what he could. But even those felt bittersweet. He'd walk on stage, sing the hits, smile through it, but you could see it in his eyes. Something was missing. The fire was still there, but the world wasn't looking anymore. Not like before. Not like when they needed him. And in those quiet years, while most thought he'd faded away, Sisqó was still carrying the weight of his own name. A name once shouted by millions, now mostly remembered through nostalgia. But this wasn't the end of the story. Because underneath the silence, the man who gave the world that unforgettable voice still had something left to say. People love a comeback story, but they rarely talk about the pain it takes to even try one. For Sisqó, every attempt at revival came with a quiet kind of heartbreak. New interviews, new music, new ideas only to be ignored by the very system that once praised him. He wasn't asking for pity. He was asking to be heard. But the industry had a short memory, and worse, a shallow heart. Once you're no longer trending, you're treated like a relic. No matter how hard you fight to stay relevant. He tried reality TV. He tried reunions with Drew Hill. And every time, the narrative was the same. Is Sisqó making a comeback? But what fans didn't see was how those moments were filled with compromise, creative control lost, image reshaped, promises made but not kept. Every step forward seemed to come with someone else pulling the strings. And Sisqó had already lived through that once. He didn't want to be controlled again. Behind the scenes, he was battling more than just fading fame. There were emotional scars left by years of being propped up, used and dropped. When the lights are always on you, you don't have time to process pain. You just smile, perform, and keep going. But when the lights go off, the silence is deafening. That's when the self-doubt creeps in. That's when the memories haunt you. The tour buses, the interviews, the applause, all of it. Now distant echoes. And yet, through it all, he kept going. He kept writing. He kept recording. Not because he was chasing the charts, but because music was still his truth. Even when the world stopped listening, he never stopped singing. That takes strength most people will never understand. Sisqó didn't vanish because he failed. He vanished because the industry stopped believing in him before he ever had the chance to grow. They wanted a pop star. He was becoming something deeper. And when he no longer fit the mold, they left him behind. But he never stopped fighting. And deep down, he never gave up on himself. Time passed. But the name Sisqó never disappeared completely. It lived in playlists, in nostalgic dance floors. In every moment someone shouted Thong Song at a party. His legacy wasn't gone, it was frozen, trapped in a moment of pop culture that the world never truly let him evolve beyond. And that's part of the tragedy. While other artists were allowed to reinvent themselves, Sisqó was boxed in by the very thing that made him famous. He spoke about it in quiet interviews. Years after the spotlight had faded, he didn't sound bitter. He sounded tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of being labeled. Tired of being reduced to one song when he had given his entire life to music. People wanted to laugh, to remember the wild outfits, the flashy energy, the chaos of the early 2000s, but they didn't want to see the man beneath all that. The man who built his career on passion, who fought for every stage, who burned out trying to keep up with a world that demanded too much and gave too little. He had moments of peace, family, growth, moments where he stepped away from the industry just to breathe. But music kept pulling him back, not for the fame but for the connection. Because while the public may have forgotten what Sisqó meant, he hadn't. He knew his worth. He knew what he gave to the culture. And deep down, he believed there was still room for him, not as a comeback story, but as an artist in his own right. And slowly, a new version of him began to surface. More grounded, more self-aware. He embraced his past, but no longer let it define his future. He started appearing again, smaller shows, interviews, studio sessions, and while the buzz wasn't what it once was, the passion was real. The people who showed up weren't just fans of a hit song. They were fans of the artist, the journey, the struggle. They saw the man now, not just the moment he came from, because sometimes survival is the real success. And Sisqó had survived more than the world ever gave him credit for. Sisqó's story isn't just about a fall from fame. It's about what happens after the crowd leaves, after the lights go out, after the headlines move on. It's about resilience. In a world that worships hype and forgets heart, his name may never return to the top of the charts. He may never fill stadiums like he once did. But what he carries now is something deeper than a #1 hit. He carries wisdom, experience, survival. He knows what it feels like to be the center of the universe one day and invisible the next. He knows what it's like to be misunderstood, underestimated, and written off. And still, he never let that define him. He still walks on stage with pride. He still sings those songs, not because he's trapped in the past, but because he honors what they gave him. He knows those songs saved him once, and they still have the power to move people. Even now, He's made peace with the fact that the industry may never celebrate him the way it did others. But he also knows that his impact runs deeper than people realize. He gave the world something unforgettable, a sound, a style, a moment that still echoed more than 2 decades later. That's not failure. That's legacy. What happened to Sisqó wasn't a single moment. It was a long, quiet unraveling of a system that never planned to protect him beyond his prime. But he endured. He found his voice again, not as a pop star, but as a survivor of the machine. And now, when he steps into a room, he no longer chases approval. He carries his story like armor, scarred, real, and unbreakable. So when people ask, what really happened to Sisqó, the answer isn't simple. He rose fast. He fell hard, but he stood back up. And in a world that only claps for winners, that makes him something rare. Not a faded star, not a forgotten name, but a man who found peace when the fame was gone and still had the courage to keep singing. There's a quiet strength that comes from being forgotten and choosing to return anyway. Sisqó didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. But he still showed up, still performed, still poured his heart into the mic as if the world was listening even if most had stopped. That's what made his story different. He didn't chase revenge. He didn't scream for attention. He just kept moving, step by step, through the shadows of an industry that once called him a star. He began reconnecting with fans in intimate settings, smaller venues, meet and greets, old school tours with Drew Hill. And those who showed up didn't care about chart positions or Billboard stats. They came because his voice had won soundtrack moments in their lives. They came because even if the world moved on, his music hadn't lost its meaning. And in those rooms, something powerful happened. For the first time in years, Sisqó wasn't performing to stay relevant. He was performing because he had nothing left to hide. In interviews, he became more reflective, more honest. He spoke about mental health, about disappointment, about how hard it is to climb when people only want to see you fall. He admitted his mistakes, admitted the pressure got to him, but he never blamed anyone. Not fully, because at the end of the day, he understood the game, and he also understood how easily it chews people up and spits them out. What sets him apart isn't just that he survived. It's that he kept his integrity. He didn't fake drama for attention. He didn't sell out his name. He held on to his story, even when no one asked for it anymore. And slowly, fans began to see the full picture, not just the man who gave us a viral hit, but the one who kept standing after the applause ended. This wasn't about reclaiming the spotlight. It was about reclaiming himself, his peace, his purpose, his voice. Because sometimes, the greatest comeback isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, real, and Sisqó, flawed, resilient, still standing, reminds us all that even after the music fades, the soul behind it can still rise. He may never top the charts again. He may never recreate the frenzy of that first hit, but Sisqó is still here, still creating, still performing for the people who never stop believing, and more importantly, for himself. In a world that chews artists up and forgets their names, he's still standing with his name intact and his soul unbroken. He lived through the rise, the fall, the silence, and the doubt. And in the end, he didn't let the industry define his worth. Because real legacy isn't about staying on top forever. It's about what you do when no one's looking. It's about how you carry the pain, the lessons, and the silence and still show up. Still sing, still move forward. Sisqó didn't just survive fame. He survived the absence of it. And that's something few ever do. His story may not have the ending the world expected, but it has something more powerful: truth. And in the end, that truth is louder than any song.